space of meditation, and we could call that space the space of being, not the space of doing. So it's understandable for a newbie in meditation to want to do meditation, and it's understandable for a newbie in meditation to have the idea that me as a person is going to do meditation, right? I'm going to do meditation. And then I sit there and go to do meditation, and I'll share with you my own experience of this. Back in the day, the idea of meditating seemed interesting, it seemed like something that might be fun, something maybe akin to getting high on drugs or getting drunk or, something like that. I don't know. Back in the day, people were doing a lot of stuff that seemed interesting. And so I tried it, and I didn't like it, because I found myself sitting there waiting for it to be over because I was suffering with the experience of listening to all this thinking going on in my mind that wouldn't stop, and my body was like wanting to move. It didn't want to stay still. So, and then the voice in my head started to question the whole project, and started to say, what the hell are you doing this for, This isn't any fun. Why do people do this? They're weird. This must be a religious thing. It's not for you. And that's the way it goes for a lot of people, right? That's why the people that often come to this class come and go. They don't just come, they come and go. Because a lot of people have a lot of nitwit ideas about everything, right? And one of the nitwit ideas they have is about meditation, that they think it's some kind of thing that all you have to do is sit there and be still and have a mantra, maybe find a guru somewhere, and then you'll start to have this bliss that they talk about, you'll start to enjoy the experience. Well, the reality of it is that, that's not the way it is. In the beginning of practicing meditation, it is very challenging for anybody, because how often do human beings sit still for 30 minutes and not talk and pay attention to their breath? Most human beings will live and die and not experience that, right? Or they'll try it like I did and say, the hell with that, it's drugs for me all the way, right? So the real practice of meditation means that you understand that you are going to have to deal with the initial phase of the practice, which means you're going to have to sit through that. You're going to have to be with the restlessness that comes up. Why would you do that? Well, the reason you would do that is because if you study the teachings that coincide with the practice of meditation, you will understand that if you persist in the practice, that it will change. It won't continue to be the same in terms of your putting up with the practice. If you stick with it, just like if you stick with anything in life that produces results, you'll start to see the results. But it takes some time, and it takes support, and it takes some understanding, and it takes some education about what you're doing. Because generally speaking, people understand, in the contemporary commercial expression of meditation, people understand meditation to be stress reduction. As it was presented by, John Kabat-Zinn. It was presented by John Kabat-Zinn, but John Kabat-Zinn really put it on the scene, right? And he was smart enough to call it mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's how he got away with it, right? And started it in hospitals for people who were dealing with surgical stuff, cancer treatment, cardiac stuff that makes people very anxious. And it went over very well in hospitals. People reported that they did better, they recovered sooner, they were less anxious and so forth. But unfortunately, that misrepresented meditation, because meditation, as it was originally conceived in the East, was not for stress reduction. It was for learning. It was for practicing coming out of the condition that human beings live in which they consider themselves to be a physical body and a personality. And this condition results in all kinds of unwanted results, unwanted consequences. All mental illness comes from that situation where people are trying to live life and be a successful personality. And so there's all kinds of self-help projects, there's self-improvement projects, and meditation can be considered part of that. But it's not part of that. Meditation, as it was originally conceived, was to come to an understanding about reality and come to the understanding that this physical body and this personality, while they may be necessary in the world, while they may be necessary to function in the world, in time and space, right, and in a society, right, that they're not the truth. No, it is a particular condition that comes into play when a person is born and they are indoctrinated or conditioned into the culture, into the society, into the family, into all the things that come together that produce for you the understanding of who you are. And you don't have any options. You know, when you're a little kid, they don't say, would you like to have the, you know, become a personality option, or would you like to have the becoming awareness option? There aren't any options. You're told there's no such thing as options. Reality is what you're told it is, and that's all there is, right? So there's no question about it, right? Everybody grows up and learns to be a body, learns to be a personality, has a name, has a story, has patterns of behavior, you know, has ways that they are. You know, if you think about any person in your life, you could probably come up with a description of them, how that person is, the way that they are, that makes them a personality. So there's a lot of suffering involved in that, and there's a lot of physical conditions that are involved in that. And so what we're talking about here is the practice of meditation the way it was originally conceived, which is to start to look and start to see the reality of what you are and begin to practice experiencing that reality so that you do have an alternative and you can begin to see and understand that there's a natural state. There's a way of being in this world that's natural. It's not preconceived. It's not a function of your education. It's a function of who you are naturally. And that natural state is described as awareness. And that natural state is a state that exists at all times for all human beings, but for most of humanity, it doesn't show up at all. For most of humanity, it's considered a belief. For most of humanity, it's not considered something that can be experienced because most of humanity thinks that they are experiencing the way things are, right? Well, that's just not the case. And that's why it's so important to study the teachings that coincide with meditation, so you can understand that meditation is a way of actually having a direct experience of the reality of what you are. And so when we practice the technique, what are we doing? We're moving attention from the thinking activity, which is where most people spend most of their time, if not all their time, right? Move attention from the thinking activity to just being aware of the breath. And when you're being aware of the breath, you're not being aware of the breath as the person you thought you were when you were thinking. When you're being aware of the breath, you're not being aware of the breath as the person you thought you were when you were thinking. When you're being aware of the breath, there's awareness and the breath. This is a very important aspect of meditation. When you're being aware of the breath, there's awareness and the breath. There's awareness and the body breathing. There is no person there. This is the discovery. This is the opportunity to look and see what's true, what's real, and to look and see that awareness has always been you. Awareness has always been the case, but you have been preoccupied with thinking, and when you're preoccupied with thinking, and when you're preoccupied with the outside world, and when you learn that's all there is, you have no reason to look elsewhere. However, what has happened and what does happen is through the suffering that people experience, right, they get to their wit's end, right? They get to the end of the rope, right? They get to their wit's end. They get to a place in which they feel desperation about their experience of being a human being and living in the world. There's a sense of desperation, which is appropriate, right? Why shouldn't you feel desperate when the only thing you have to look forward to is death? Why shouldn't you feel desperate? You should feel desperate. In fact, I suggest to you that this is part of the plan for human beings, is to feel desperate, that this is part of the plan. And as those of you know who have been here for a while, right, that plan can sometimes be called the grace of God, right? Part of the plan. The plan being that at some point you'll be desperate enough to look and see if there's anything you're missing. You know, is there anything I didn't see? Is there anything I didn't give my attention to that might give me the opportunity to discover something other than what I feel desperate about? And so people look, and sometimes in their desperation, because they're desperate and they look, they're open-minded enough to discover meditation and to discover these teachings of the truth, right, which go back as far as recorded time, right? And they begin to make contact with the opportunity that this is, and the opportunity that this is that for the opportunity to be naturally happy, the opportunity to be naturally relaxed, to be at home in your body, right? The opportunity to have clarity, you know, the opportunity to recognize the fact that the awareness that you actually are is the truth. And the personality was a necessary learning process in order for us to be here today and speak English and function in time and move around in space and do all the other stuff we do in the world, right? That's necessary for us to have a personality and to consider ourselves a physical body to function that way, right? However, that's not the end of the story. And it is possible to discover that there is an awareness that is actually real. The personality is not real in the sense you can't show me your personality. The personality only exists in your mind. The personality only exists as a thinking activity. If I ask you who you are, you cannot answer the question without thinking. Check it out. You cannot answer that question without thinking, unless you've been here for a while and you practice meditation. Then you know better, right? Then you know that to answer that question with thinking is not going to produce the truth. It's going to produce what you think, and what you think is never true. What you think is never true. That might explain why things get so difficult in life, right? Because if what you think is never true, and you're following what you think, and if what you feel is often just a reaction, not an actual appropriate response to the situation, right? And you're following your feelings and you're following your thoughts, right? Then no wonder things go so bad so often. Because the thought is never the truth. This is one of the primary aspects of the teaching that goes along with the practice of meditation. Thinking is an interpretation. If you get that one thing, that'll open up something for you. Thinking is an interpretation. You can't think the truth. It's impossible to think the truth. You can only conceptualize the truth. And when you conceptualize the truth, you dumb it down. You turn it into language. And it's not language, right? When you look at a tree, right? Most human beings, when they look at a tree, they see a tree. That's really a tree. I'm looking at a tree. When you study meditation, you start to understand you don't know what that is. You learn the word tree. A tree is a concept, right? An infant that doesn't have language yet would not know what that is. They wouldn't know that it was a tree. Then you learn that it's a tree and you think that it is a tree. You learn that this is your body and you think this is your body. You learn that you're a person and you think you are a person. And none of that is true. None of that is true. So for somebody who's uninitiated to hear what I just said, they'd say, get out of here, right? And I would get out of here, right? Because who wants to hang around with people that are suffering and lost in their conceptual mental states all the time, right? And breeding that all around them all the time, right? So the reason that I point what I'm pointing to is because I want you to understand the importance and the value of the practice of meditation. One of the ways I can tell if somebody really understands meditation, one of the ways I can tell if they really understand the truth, right, is that they realize there's nothing more important in their life than to wake up to that. Because if you don't wake up to that, you're living in a conceptual world, you're living in a story that you made up, you're living in a story that society is telling you, right? And none of that is true. And because it's not true, it ends up being the source of tremendous suffering. And an example of that these days, the example of that from the past couple of years has been the pandemic, right? Now the example of that is the war. But I promise you, after the war, there'll be something else. And before the pandemic, there was something else, right? Meaning that there will always be something happening in the world, in the environment, that produces suffering. And then we get involved with it and we interpret it wrong, right? We interpret it wrong. Then we try and fix it with wrong fixes, and it keeps happening, like the war. How many wars do we have to have before we realize it doesn't work? All you do is bomb, a country invades another country, bombs it out, bombs all the buildings, kills a lot of people, and then moves in. What the hell sense does that make? Right? But yet here it is again, after thousands of years of this continual pattern of failing behavior, of destructive behavior. And the war, and one of the things the Dalai Lama says, is the war that happens in the world is nothing other than a projection and an expression of the war that's happening in your mind all day long. All day long. And if you pay attention, you'll see that that's true, that you are in conflict with life. You are in conflict with other people, you're in conflict with life, you're in conflict with the past, you're in conflict with the future, you're in conflict with finances, you're in conflict with politics. Do I have to continue? Isn't that war? Isn't conflict war? And isn't conflict mean that you're struggling? And isn't conflict mean that the way the mind and the person operates in regard to conflict is to try and get in control and dominate something, right? Never works, but it's given that human beings are one-trick ponies, it'll just keep going like that. And here we are because, fortunately, some percentage of humanity, going back as far as recorded history, right, has recognized the lie, has recognized the illusion, has recognized the dream, has recognized that there is a reality, and the reality that exists is the consciousness itself, is the awareness itself. And when you look, you can see it's true. You don't need evidence for it because it's self-evident. And this is the first step. In the practice of meditation, this is the first step, right? Is to recognize your true nature. Upon that recognition, having recognized that, meaning that you look, right? It's here all the time. It's with you all the time. So if you look and you recognize awareness and you see, oh, there is awareness here always. It never changes. It's always been this way. When people wake up and have an experience of the revelation of awareness, right? The thing they commonly say is, oh, this has always been like this. This isn't new. This has always been like this. How could I not notice this? How could I not notice awareness, right? Well, it's easy not to notice it because you've learned to ignore it. That's called ignorance, right? You've learned to ignore it. And then even if you didn't learn to ignore it and you didn't have anybody to point it out to you, it has no form, it has no shape, it doesn't exist in time, it's not going anywhere, it has no emotion, it doesn't speak, it doesn't think. So it's nothing. It's nothing. So it's not too easy to notice nothing, right? But it is easy and possible to experience nothing. And that's what meditation is. The experience of nothing. The experience of no thing, meaning you. The experience of awareness, meaning you. Not a thing, right? But yet very real, realer than anything else, right? As an experience, right? And when you make contact with that reality, things start to fall in place. It's like, I heard this said this way the other day, and I thought it was really cool, right? That it's like you are the fruit that is put in the process of meditation, which causes the beginning of fermentation. You're going to turn into alcohol. The fermentation doesn't require anything. It happens by itself, doesn't it? Yeah. Under the right conditions, it happens by itself. And that's the thing that's important for you to understand. See, the person wants you to think that this is too hard. I hear that so often. People say, oh, this is so difficult. Easier said than done. Oh, I don't know if I can, I don't understand. This is so difficult, right? That's only because the person's trying to understand. The person's trying to become enlightened, right? But what this is about is discovering that the person doesn't exist. The person doesn't exist. And that may be confusing, right? Because you don't know anything else but that, right? But when you start to discover the reality of yourself as awareness, you have a place from which to see what I mean, you see? You have a new place to view from when you discover awareness. You can look from there, right? You can see from there. So instead of seeing from the personality out, and this is what I was saying last time, it's very important. Instead of seeing from the personality out, now your awareness is back here, behind the personality, and you can watch the personality moving through life. You can watch the personality, you can watch the thinking of the person, you can watch the emotions of the person, you can watch the physical sensations of the person, you can watch the activities of the person, you can watch the speaking of the person happen, right? And when you look at it from awareness and you're no longer attached to the idea that you're the person, okay, then you can start to watch the person fail. The only value in proceeding in life as a person or a personality and using that position to function in the world, the only value that that has in reality is that you come to recognize that it's a failure. Upon recognizing that it's a failure, you will then consider other possibilities, and you may then come in contact with this possibility. So that's kind of just a brief statement about meditation, but I want to make sure that I take some time with you to answer any questions you have, because as you ferment, right, as you become something that produces pleasure, like alcoholic beverage, as you ferment. But the thing about the fermentation that's very important for you to realize is that it will happen in spite of you. I was listening to Richard Rohr the other day, and he made that statement. He said, "Are you kidding? Are you kidding?" He said, "Given everything I did wrong, and given all my resistance to the experience that's available here, it's a miracle." Right? Because it will happen in spite of you. The fermentation will happen in spite of you. And I say that to you because I don't want you to be concerned about it. If you listen to your personality, it will start trying to talk you out of this. If you listen to your personality, it wants you back. It wants you to come back and start to be mean and ugly and fight your way through this life, right? Well, but if you don't listen to that personality, if you understand that as long as you engage with this process, as long as you practice meditation, as long as you listen to the teaching, right? As long as you have a commitment to the truth, right? That the process will go on whether you like it, whether you're down with it or not. All you have to do is stay on the path. That's why they call it the path. And it's important to have a teacher so you have somebody that can tell you you're off the path, move you back to the path. Yes?
You had mentioned that thoughts are never true. So a while back, I was 10 miles from here, and I had the thought, I have to get to this class by 5 o'clock, and this is the route I'm going to take. That's a thought.
Uh-huh.
That thought was true because I got here.
Well, that thought was accurate because you got here.
What's the difference?
Well, what's the difference between the menu and the food in a restaurant? Can you eat the menu?
No.
Oh. What's the difference between a thought and the truth? The words on the menu can represent the food, right? Could even stimulate you to have an image of the food and start to salivate.
So the food is the experience.
The food is the experience.
And the drive here was my experience.
And the drive is your experience. That's all true.
It wasn't my thought. It was an experience.
Yes. It just so see, that's the thing that makes this seemingly confusing, right? Because some thoughts are accurate. They're still thoughts. An interpretation can be an accurate interpretation. Unfortunately, most of the time that's not true. And one of the things that brain science tells us to help along with this, right, is the studies show, the research shows that we spend 70% of our time in mind wandering, right? We spend 70% of our time wasting energy, right? Thinking that we're thinking about ourselves. That's what mind wandering is. Thinking that you're thinking about yourself. And if you pay attention to mind wandering, it's always only about you. Notice that? You don't mind wander and think about other people and how much you're concerned about them and what can I do differently. You don't mind wander that way. That is what we call the working mind, right? Now, mind wandering is just thinking about me, all about me, what I'm afraid will happen, what I want to happen, what has happened. What happened yesterday, what's going to happen tomorrow? Where are my glasses? When am I going to lose my mind completely? If you're older, as we are, you start getting into that thing. The fact that I just walked from the living room into the kitchen and don't know why I'm here, what does this mean? Right? Well, that's just the process of the brain, getting old, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean anything. The research shows the more you use it, the more you retain the way it works. The more you use it, the more you retain the way it works. Now, I experienced being lost in the kitchen, right? But it doesn't matter to me. I don't care about that, because lost in the kitchen isn't what's really important to me, right? If I couldn't remember to meditate, I'd be worried. And you guys know, I'm just like you in terms of being old enough that my memory is starting to falter, right? But when it comes to this subject, I'm right there. I'm right there. So what's that mean? What does that say? Maybe it means there's some other resource I'm using other than my brain, right? Maybe if you get access to the awareness, you may be getting access to something that's unlimited instead of the limited database that you have in your memory, right? Yes.
Isn't it because you said it, I'm sorry, that it's something really important to you, you'll remember more?
Of course. Of course you will. Of course you will. And that's why I go back to what I said earlier. You make this important enough that you emphasize its importance to yourself all the time, and that will have it create enough of a pattern in your brain that it'll be a solid neural pattern. Through emphasis, right? Through emphasis. When you're in a position of a personality, you complain and you say it should be different. If it was different, I'd get this, right? But you do that about everything in life at some point or another, right? The reality of it is, it's not true that you have to study all these teachers, right? I suggest that you do because it gives you a variety of different ways to look at the same thing. So that the same thing so eventually the elephant that you felt the leg of and the trunk of and the ear of shows up. That's why I say listen to a lot of different people, because they're describing it differently. One person's describing the leg of the elephant, the other's describing the trunk, right? And if you listen to all of them and you keep looking for what they're pointing to instead of thinking that what they say is it. It's not what they say is it, it's what they're pointing to with what they say is it. If you keep looking for what they're pointing at when they speak, eventually it'll show up for you, right? And then all of that will have been useful. And then you will actually enjoy listening to it, because for me, it's like listening to music.
But it's head stuff.
No, see, that's your interpretation. Okay?
So
See what the person does is it takes the interpretation and insists that it's true. That's head stuff, right? But you see, that's an interpretation your brain's making. I could ask somebody else here, well, is that true for you? And they would say, absolutely not. So what's true? See, I'm saying there's something other than the interpretation that's true. And that truth is the same for each person, no matter what you think. It's not a question of what you think, it's a question of what you see. That's why they call people who are awake seers. You're seeing the way it is. You don't just think about it, you actually see it the way it is. And when you make contact with life that way, right, then you start to be able to meet life where the way life is, instead of thinking life should be different. You start to meet life the way life is, and you start to be able to respond effectively and successfully in life, because you're not dreaming about it anymore, you're actually there. That's why they call it presence, right? See, until that happens, you're dreaming about something that you think is real. And you insist that it's real, and you want the world to fit the dream. And it won't fit the dream. And so you're in this constant state of being upset, or this constant state of struggling and trying, and in self-improvement and learning. And it could lead to a lot of alcohol and drugs if you're not careful. Or prescription medication if you want to do it above board. Same thing. The thinking mind's opinions, complaints, self-righteous opinions and complaints, right? The thinking mind is about something, right? It's not a direct focus on something that involves functioning, that involves doing something to produce a result, right? That's one of the things that can make this a little bit complicated, because there's a lot of putting down of thinking in these teachings, right? But that's only because thinking needs to be seen for what it is. But once you see the negative aspect of it, right, like the wandering mind, you know, the mind that is in default state much of the time, once you see that, then you can begin to appreciate it's not all bad. No. Whenever you're using your mind, and see, this is the thing. You can't really have a working mind until you mature. You can't really have a working mind until you mature, because until you mature, the mind's running the show. Until you mature, you're following thinking, aren't you? Yeah, you're following feeling, right? That's immature, right? Maturity means the mind's working for me. I am not working for it. That's the switch. And so you can't have a working mind until you mature, and that switch takes place, and you realize that the mind is your servant. You are not its slave. You know, the only difference between me and you is I've been at this longer. Other than that, I don't have any edge. I'm just as human as you are. I don't have any edge. I've been at this longer. I've taken it very seriously, and because of that, I get to experience the benefits. That's the way it works, and that's the way it'll work for you. You know, there's no specialness in this. There's no hierarchy in consciousness. Everybody's on the same level. Now that can get complicated because in the process of working as a community, there has to be a hierarchy, right? But that hierarchy doesn't mean that the person is better than you or different than you. They're exactly the same as you. But you see this, the question he's asking, and the question that that a lot of people will ask here, right? It's the person antagonizing me. No, it's the person antagonizing this process of the truth. The person doesn't like it. It wants to find a hole in it. Yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, right? That's just the person. If you get clear about this, it'll be very hard to find a question. Very hard to find a question, because you'll be seeing it. You'll be seeing it for yourself. And when you're seeing it for yourself, you'll be expressing it your unique way instead of having questions, right?